Hey, it's Renee from the Craft Table. We are now at week 11 of our summer embroidery stitch along. It's the last week of learning the actual embroidery stitches. This week I have several bonus stitches to go over with you. With this being the last week of learning embroidery stitches, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the different stitches that I have set aside for this week, the bonus stitches. And then I'm going to come back and talk about a few housekeeping details and explain about what I'm going to do in the very next video, when it's going to come out and what I'm going to cover. Okay? I'm going to demonstrate how to do the whipped back stitch right here along on the outside of this leaf shape. The whipped back stitch starts with a base layer of back stitches, as you might guess. And I've already stitched the back stitch on this shape. If you need a refresher on how to do the back stitch, I went over that in week 2's video, so you can reference that. And when you do the whipped back stitch, you can do the second part of the stitch in the same color thread as the back stitch if you'd like, or you can do a different color, a contrasting color, just depending on the stitching, the project, and what look that you're going for. If you were to do a contrasting color, it kind of has like a candy cane effect when you're finished. But in this particular instance, I'm going to use the same color thread. And I have my thread knotted, and I'm going to bring it up from the back of my fabric at the base of my back stitch. And you're going to bring it up on one side. You can decide which side you want to do. It doesn't really matter. And then you're going to bring your needle under that first back stitch, coming in from the opposite side. So since I brought my needle up from the left side, I'm going to go under the stitch from the right side. And we're basically whipping each of the back stitches, and we're going to be doing this on top of the fabric. So you want to make sure that you don't pierce the fabric and that you don't snag any of the threads. So some people recommend using like a tapestry needle because the end is blunt. Or you can use the eye part of the needle to go under if you find that you have issues with the needle snagging on other stitches. But I usually just use my regular embroidery needle for this. So I went under that first back stitch, and now I'm going to go under again from right to left with the second back stitch, pulling my needle through. And again, under that stitch, pulling the thread and the needle through. Now you can see I'm turning a corner here, but I'm still going to go what I would consider from right to left. It's just since I'm going in the opposite direction, it looks like I'm going from left to right. But if you think about it, if it makes it easier to visualize, I'm going to turn my stitching around. So you can see I'm still doing from right to left. I am about to do the last back stitch. And I'm going to take my needle to the back at the edge of that last back stitch. So that was the whipped back stitch. And now I'm going to demonstrate the back stitched chain stitch, which is another stitch that combines two previously learned embroidery stitches. And it begins with the foundation of the chain stitch, which I've already done right here. And this is the green areas where I'm going to demonstrate this stitch. And the chain stitch we went over in week 4. And in this case, I'm using a contrasting colored thread. And I'm going to bring my needle up on the inside of the second chain stitch. And I'm working from this direction. I'm considering this the base of my stitching, and then going around to this side. You can see I'm bringing my needle up inside the second chain stitch. So I'm taking a back stitch into that first chain stitch. I'm pulling my needle and thread to the back. And then I'm coming up inside the third stitch, so a stitch ahead of the stitch I just completed. And taking my needle back down to where the previous stitch ended, like I would a back stitch. Because that's what I'm doing. I'm basically doing back stitches. They just happen to be inside of a chain stitch. Once again, I'm bringing my needle up inside the next chain stitch and then going back down to where the previous stitch ends. Once again, bringing my needle inside the next chain stitch, pulling it through to the top, and then putting it down where the previous stitch ended. And then I'll continue that with every remaining chain stitch. I have one remaining chain stitch left. I'm going to demonstrate this next stitch in this orange area right here. And I'm using this gold area as my base of the stitch. And then the top of the orange, or the outside of this orange shape where it meets this darker burgundy color, is the top of my stitch. And it doesn't have to be stitched in a circle. It could be any shape that you want to fill in. But this one happens to be a circle, so it doesn't really matter where I would start. Typically, you would start on the left-hand side of the area that you want to fill in. My needle is threaded and knotted, and I'm bringing it up from the back of my fabric. I'm going to pull it through at the base of my stitch. I'm going to hold my thread off to the side in my left hand. I'm going to place my needle back down where I came up, and then I'm bringing the needle back up to the top to where I want my stitch to end. I'm looping the thread behind my needle as I pull the needle through. So at this point, it looks sort of like a lazy daisy stitch, basically. But instead of ending my stitch with a little short stitch over the top of my loop like I would with a lazy daisy stitch, I'm going to bring my needle back down a stitch length away at the base of the area I'm stitching. And again, bringing my needle back up to where I want the top of my stitch. Looping the thread behind my needle and pulling my needle through. Okay, so let's do that again. And I'm just working around this center since I am stitching a circular area. So I've got my needle going down a stitch length over. I'm going to bring my needle up at the top of where I want my stitch to be. This time it's a little bit shorter, like that. What I could do, taking my needle down, but before I pull it all the way through, I'm bringing my needle back up right there, making sure that it's within the loop of that thread. And I'm going to just work my way around this circle, doing the same thing. Now this is another organic shape, as all of them are on this panel. So it's not going to be exact. You know, the height of my stitches are not exact because I'm working around a shape where the base is not exactly circular and neither is the outside. And so you can see this one's a little bit wider as I make my way around. All right, so this is the last stitch for this little circle. So what I'll do now, take my straight stitch down into inside that very first stitch at the top. So if I were to do this again in this type of shape on this panel, I probably would mark out the lines first so it was a little bit more evenly spaced than I've done, but I'm not totally dissatisfied with it. I was just kind of winging it in this particular area. I stitched it, let's see. So do you see this area right here? I stitched this area with the blanket stitch over on this side. So this gives you another idea of how it would look stitched in a different shape that's not circular. And I only did it right here. The other parts were thinner, so I just did the regular chain stitch in that blue area. So you can compare it to this is what it looks like when it's not stitched. Here I did the blanket stitch here, and then I did the chain stitch along here and along there, and then there.
I'm going to demonstrate the remaining stitches on a piece of white linen that I've been using before to demonstrate certain stitches. That does not mean that they cannot be applied to the fabric panel. It's just that for these stitches, I felt it was easier for me to demonstrate them on a separate piece of fabric. First up is the stem stitch. You want to bring your needle up from the back at the base of where you want to start stitching. Holding your thread off to the side, you're going to take your needle down a little stitch length away, and you're going to pull it to the back, but not all the way. You're going to hold that top thread a little bit off to the side, and then you're going to bring your, for the very first stitch, you're going to bring your needle up halfway in between where you originally came up and where you went down. Holding that thread off to the side, then you pull your needle and your thread all the way to the top. For the next stitch, you're going to again take your needle a stitch length away, holding that top thread off to the side. You're going to take your needle down. This time when you come up, you're going to come up right where the previous stitch ended. And you see how you have that thread off to the side? Again, put your thread over to the side, take your needle down a stitch length away, bring it to the back part way, leaving that loop a little bit on the top, and then bring your needle up again right where that previous stitch ended. And then you can pull your thread all the way through. And you keep doing that as you get to the end. You want to kind of make sure you're spacing it so that your last stitch is a little bit shorter. So this is my next to the last stitch. I'm doing it like I normally would, bringing my needle up where the previous stitch ended. And then this time I've planned it so that my very last stitch is just going to be a short. It's not as long as the regular stitch length. And that's because you're just going to take one straight stitch to the back. And that finishes up the stem stitch. And obviously this is a great stitch for doing stems of flowers. The next two stitches I'm going to demonstrate actually are a combination of previous stitches that we've done and then combining them to make new stitches. And there's quite a few embroidery stitches like that. We kind of saw that with the whip back stitch and the backstitched chain stitch. Sometimes when you combine stitches, they become a new stitch with a different name. And then sometimes it's just a matter of combining stitches, you know, just for fun to give it a look that you like. And we'll see that a little bit later on. So these two stitches to the right of the stem stitch that I've already demonstrated, I forgot to hit the record button when I was stitching those, so I'm going to recreate them. But basically, the first one is called the wheatear stitch, and it's a combination of straight stitches and a reverse lazy daisy stitch. And then the one on the right, if it has a name, I don't know what it is. It's basically sort of a combination of a lazy daisy stitch with a pistol stitch. So basically, to make the wheatear stitch, you're going to make two straight lines that are angled in the shape of a V. So once you have your V, you're going to then bring your needle up centered a little bit below that V, and then you're going to slide your needle underneath those two straight stitches, making a loop, and then putting your needle back down where you came up, making like a single lazy daisy stitch, but in reverse. So I like to nestle these sort of like I do the fly stitch. So you'll bring up your needle again, make a slanted straight stitch going one way and then the other way to form a V. Bring your needle down, centering it, pull it all the way up to the top, slide it underneath that V without piercing the fabric, and then bringing it around to form a loop and putting your needle back down in that same hole and taking it to the back. And that is the wheatear stitch. Now this other stitch is, you're going to start like you're making a lazy daisy stitch, bringing it up to the top, but then instead of taking a straight stitch, you're going to wrap your needle a couple of times, kind of like we did with the pistol stitch. You're going to wrap it, I usually do 3 times, and then take your needle down a little bit of ways above your lazy daisy stitch, and you can adjust how long you want to make that combination of straight stitch French knot at the top. And then you can also do a lazy daisy stitch, do your French knots, and then just take it right over the top, kind of like you would the straight stitch for a lazy daisy stitch. But in this instance, you're doing a French knot over the top. Now, these stitches that I'm referring to, like I mentioned, the pistol stitch and the lazy daisy stitch and the fly stitch, those are all stitches that we've done in the past, and I can't remember offhand which week each of those stitches may have been discussed, but you can go to the main blog post that I have linked in the description, and it lists out each week with the link to that stitch video. So the other thing that you can do is just combine stitches in a way that just that makes up a new design. And that's what I did here. I just started out with a straight line of chain stitch. I just did a chain stitch in a straight line. Then I went back with that same green color and I did straight stitches that sort of represent leaves of a flower or grass or whatever you would call it. And so I just angled them with a little bit of space. I wanted to leave room to then go back and add some lazy daisy stitches in between, just sort of represent flowers. So it's a very simple design. I just did one long line of a chain stitch, straight stitch, and then lazy daisy stitches, and that's it. And it's, like I said, it's just a simple, sweet little design that you can make with just 3 different stitches. So here's another example of just combining different stitches to get a certain look or design. And what I did here is I did in the bright pink, that is the raised chain stitch. Again, we did that in a previous week. And the aqua is 3 sets of 5 lazy daisy stitches, kind of done in like a fan array, if you will. And then with the yellow, I did straight stitches inside each of the lazy daisy stitches, and then I did French knots in between each of those lazy daisy stitches. Now, this was just done, I just roughly drew out a straight line and sort of tried to place the design along there, but it's by no means perfect. If I had wanted it to be for a certain pattern, I of course would make sure that all of the units were uniform, but this was just, again, just something I quickly traced out and stitched, and then just to give you an idea of what you could do combining different stitches. The possibilities really are endless. There's so many embroidery stitches out there. There's so many different ways to combine the various stitches. So many gorgeous colors of threads out there, different weights of thread. The possibilities, you're really only limited by your imagination. So those are the different bonus stitches that I am sharing with you regarding this stitch along. There are so many embroidery stitches out there, and our time is limited, so I couldn't go over all of them. I hope you like the ones that I selected and that you enjoy embroidering them on your panel and practicing them and using them in future projects. So we're done with the stitching part of the sew along. Week 12 is all about finishing up our panel. I will go over prepping it for incorporating into other projects, different, variety of different ones. And I'll either have a tutorial of how to finish them in a certain way, or I will link, if it's someone else's tutorial, I will link to all that next time around. But what I wanted, the big housekeeping detail is, so the schedule shows week 12 being next Saturday. I'm going to push it back for a few weeks. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons for that. And you've heard me mention before that this summer stitch along is different from last summer stitch along, and that this summer I am stitching along with you at the same time. Taking a couple of weeks in between the last stitch video and coming back with finished projects just makes sense. It gives us all a little bit of extra time to apply all the different stitches that we've discussed over these last few months. But also, again, if you've been keeping track, this summer, anytime I have done any kind of traveling or someone has come to visit me, there have been travel hiccups every step of the way. And it doesn't matter what it was, there have just been delays. And so last week, when I was recording the video where I said, I remember what I said, but like, oh, I'm in Orlando. I came home for a quick week and I'm about to head to the airport to fly back to Montana. Well, yeah, I did head to the airport to fly back to Montana, only to find out my flight was canceled. It was rescheduled for later in the evening. This was all the day before the actual video needed to be published on YouTube. And I thought, I thought I'd have time. I'd already done all the recording, but I thought I'd have plenty of time to edit everything once I got back to Montana and, put it up on YouTube. I should have learned my lesson with all these other weeks. Well, like I said, my flight was canceled. Then it was delayed. Then it was delayed again. And there's no direct flight from Florida to Montana. And anyway, I ended up spending the night in Chicago, and I was editing the video literally on the plane, the part that I could do without needing internet. I had my headphones in so people couldn't hear me talk, and I was, um, slicing and splicing and all that with the different parts of the video. And then I finally got to, like I said, I had a layover in Chicago. And I get to the hotel, like, I don't know, 11 p.m. at night or something like that. And I had to do some voiceover stuff with some of the videos. And so I'm doing that in the hotel room with listening to the person in the next room with their TV on. Anyway, it was just crazy. So I know that this next week coming up, that if I were to try and get this video out for next Saturday, we've got some guests coming to visit, which is awesome. I'm looking forward to that. It's one of my friends who's actually stitching along as well, so I'm hoping we can do some of that together. But then after they leave, we've got another RV trip, and all of our RV trips this summer have been to actually get the RV repaired from one trip to another. So I just know that within this next week that there's no way that I can finish all my stitching, make the different projects that I have in mind with the stitching, record the videos, edit the videos, and get them up by Saturday. So instead of me trying to do that and then coming back last minute saying, we need to hold off a little bit, I'm just going to make the decision that we're just going to be pushing week 12 back a few weeks. So I hope you don't mind that. I hope you understand why I'm doing that. And so thank you for allowing me to explain my crazy summer and what I think about these next few weeks. I hope that you've enjoyed we're week 11, but 10 weeks of embroidery stitches. And I hope you enjoy the next couple of weeks getting caught up and applying those stitches. And if you have any questions or suggestions or anything like that, email me or leave a comment here on the YouTube video. And again, if you are enjoying the stitch along, please leave me a thumbs up. Tell your friends about it. Even though we're wrapping up the stitch along, the videos are still out here. I hope that it's a resource that people find helpful, and you can go back and look at it. Happy stitching, and I will see you back here in a couple of weeks.